What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Bill's Chat Live. Happy Friday to all of you out there who are choosing to spend your Friday nights with us. I am Josh McCarty. He is Luka. We are Bill's Chat. Luka, how are you doing on this Friday night?
I'm glad it's the weekend. It was a chaotic work end of the week, but it's been a relaxing Friday so far as I've kind of done the usual things I do before we go live on air. Um, it's one of those things where I forget sometimes what it feels like to just be a football fan. I'll be
Mhm.
honest, and it's like we don't have a Bills game to be prepping for. We're not thinking about what Sunday's outcome will be, anything of that variety. It's more of a just me assessing some of those fantasy situations, all of that stuff, the betting lines, things of that nature. There's a real relaxing vibe to this, strangely enough, Josh, that I am quite thoroughly enjoying.
Well, you and I kind of had a discussion today about what we wanted to do with this show because if you've been paying attention to Bill's Twitter this week, it's been a lot of negativity. And, rightfully so. And we had our hand in that where, a lot of should they fire Sean McDermott? If they don't make the playoffs, should they fire Brandon Bean? What's going on with Von Miller? And then the Von Miller conversation took a real sharp turn a couple days ago when his legal situation popped up. All we know right now, for those that don't know, is Von Miller had a warrant for his arrest. He turned himself in. There's a domestic violence allegations against him as it stands now. There's no update on that. And we certainly aren't going to get into that beyond just what we know. And we wish the best for everybody involved. But as far as what we are going to do tonight, Luca, I think while the Bills are still mathematically alive, and what we're going to get into tonight is they are very much still mathematically alive, as much as that seems really weird to say. They have 5 games to play. It doesn't make sense to sit here and be like, should they fire Sean McDermott if they don't make the playoffs? Should they change offensive coordinator? Should they promote Joe Brady to head coach? We've seen that out there. If they don't make the playoffs, I think if and when that happens, there will be plenty of time this offseason for that conversation. But Luca, we are still in this race. We are still running this race. And as we are going to get into tonight, if the Bills can take care of business and win 4 out of these next 5 games, they have a real look at making the playoffs. So before we get into the down and dirty and what you need to know about the Bills' playoff chances, what you need to be looking for this weekend, even when the Bills are not playing, I agree with Roy Collins. No math, not hard math tonight, Roy. If you know me, you know that the expectation is going to be very low on the level of math we're going to get into. Luca, where's your head at with these Bills? I know I asked you after the game, the post game show against Philadelphia. We were both very emotional in that one. You've had some time to cool off, some time to process, look at the numbers. In your mind, are you still thinking playoffs? Where are you at here in this windy road of this Bills season?
The the let's put it, the outside just football spectator in me says the Bills are still a Josh Allen led team that have things in front of them where if they can take care of business, yes, they can make the playoffs. So when you kind of look at it from that outside view, it really feels like, and you can understand why some outsiders, even those Rich Eisens of the world, have not given up on the Bills and they believe that they still have that chance to turn things around. What they showed, for the most part in that Eagles game, it seems like that was a lot better of a product, we'll call it, than what was shown a few weeks ago. There's still that hope. The problem, or the thing that I just can't get out of my head, is I've seen the previous weeks and stuff, and I do think this team has turned a corner where the worst is behind them. The issue is just understanding what we have seen. I think there's still, errors to be had with this offense and with the team overall. And just they've already dug themselves in such a deep hole that you effectively need them to play perfect in order to dig their way out. And I don't know if I can truly get my head around that, only being battle scarred from this previous season, like from this past season, whatever you want to call it, previous games. And just whatever reason that my brain cannot get rid of those images of just poor games, poor game management, all of the above, where I want to believe that it's still possible. I do think it's still possible. It's just the reality in my brain cannot get to the point where I can be optimistic in any sort of way beyond playing with playoff machines and seeing what it is when you really lay it out in front of you. It's like, oh, well, I mean, if the Jags just continue to do what they're doing, things out of the Bills' control look somewhat decent in some facets of the NFL, that you're like, okay, like maybe it is possible. Outside of that, when you come back to the Bills, there's just too much inconsistency we've seen throughout the season where it's just hard to get over that hump in my brain to then be optimistic in any variety of way about playoffs for this year. You muted, Mike, or Josh. Jeez, Mike.
You can call me Mike. I understand where you're coming from. I will say this in situations like this where I want to make sure, okay, am I being a homer by thinking they have a chance? I look to Vegas. I look to the lines, and I will tell you, I had this conversation with you earlier this week. When you look at betting sites on teams in the AFC who are the betting odds to win the AFC, the top four will not surprise you. I'm not going to go what their odds are, but in order, the top four teams in the AFC to win the AFC, one is the Chiefs, two is the Ravens, three is the Dolphins, and four are the Jaguars. Those are the four projected division winners right now. The fifth team is the Bills. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. Right now, if you look at the standings, teams like the Steelers with Kenny Pickett, the Colts with Gardner Minshew reside ahead of the Bills, just win-loss wise. But there's probably not a lot of momentum from bettors with big dollars thinking that those teams are capable of going on a run. The thought is, and this is what I think is the point of frustration from a lot of Bills fans' points, is the Bills are the kind of team, as we saw last week against the Eagles, they can punch with anybody. And if they get into this tournament, holy cow, they can do some damage, particularly this year in the AFC. That's not going to have Joe Burrow, not going to have Deshaun Watson, probably not going to have Justin Herbert. The Chiefs do not look like they're hitting on all cylinders offensively. And the Bills have had good fortune against Miami. So it's just right now about, can you find a way in? So I teased this in the tweet because I did something kind of uncharacteristic this week, Luka. We're going to get into the Luka's locks later. You're more of the betting guy on this show, but I put a bet down on the Bills this week to win the Super Bowl. This was after the Eagles game, after they're sitting there at 6-6. I got on my FanDuel Sportsbook site and I saw the Bills were plus 3,300 to win the Super Bowl. And my thought process was this. Yeah, they have a long road ahead to make the playoffs. They do. Like, we're going to get into it tonight. They have to at least win 4 out of their next 5 games. Ideally, they win all 5. But if they get in, they have as good a look as anybody. And I don't think you're ever going to get Josh Allen at these kind of odds. So I put down nothing major, $100 to win 3,300. And I'll be very happy for multiple reasons if the Bills win this Super Bowl. But I don't think that's just me being Bills fan, like, hey, go Bills. Let me paint my chest blue and red and jump through a table. You can see this team, whether you want to buy into the analytics, the EPA, point differential. You can see where this team has the potential to get in and do damage. But what we have to focus on tonight, Luka, is how do they get in? So there are 2 paths for the Bills. There's the division and there's the wild card. Both of them have various challenges. The division, they are currently 3 games behind Miami. The good news is they have a game in hand and they play Miami again, so they can close that down to 2 games by taking care of business. But over the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks, Miami plays this week, they need the Dolphins to drop 2 more games than the Bills drop the rest of the way. First and foremost, Luka, if you can get yourself to a point where you envision the Bills making the playoffs, is it more so as a division winner or as coming out of this bunch of wildcard teams?
I mean, to be quite frank, I almost see it true coin flip. And the only reason my brain goes to that is just because they have that game in hand from earlier this season where they beat Miami. And you essentially control your destiny against that opponent in the most important tiebreaker, that is head to head. From there, yes, the Bills have a tough schedule, but it's one of those ones where they can still be one of those teams that wins, let's say, 3 of the next 4. And Miami also has to go down a tough path when they have to go to Baltimore late in the season, as well as play the Cowboys themselves. And I believe it is the Cowboys, if memory serves me right, they still have to play. And what I find funny about that matchup in particular, by the way, is it's the Fugazi Bowl. It's like, who is the least fake among those 2 teams? The general sound logic would though be there's more availability with the wild card and everything like that, but they don't have a ton of tiebreakers in the conference against a lot of different teams. And then even your head to heads, you lose to the Broncos, you lose to some of those other teams that are right there with you. That I just see a lot of situations where you need to be a full game ahead of all these other teams in the wild card, whereas it's a little bit more of a control your own destiny with the division, depending on how things go with the Dolphins, in those tough games. Now, down the stretch, if the Dolphins go to Baltimore and win, it is what it is. But if you win 4 of your next 5, you're most likely getting into the wild card at that point. I just think the Dolphins still have tough games in front of them where I at the end of the day, yes, statistically, you should say the 3 spots available in a wild card are more likely than a division when you have such a hole you're in. But I do believe it's more of a coin flip than kind of the eye sees when you just look strictly at a record and where the Bills currently sit in the conference standings overall.
True or false? The Bills have to win in Arrowhead for this to be a worthwhile discussion.
Oh, true. 100,000%.
I'm with you.
The Arrowhead game, although it doesn't absolutely eliminate them from playoffs, that is for conference implications and everything, of the vast variety. That is just way too important of a game with what you have in front of yourselves. You need to be able to buy yourself a potential loss against the Fugazi Cowboys. You have to do that. If you do not do that and you go into that game as a must win and then also needing help on top of it, you are in a very, very, very tough position.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think you brought up a good point that everybody wants to talk about Kansas City and the Cowboys, but we know the Chargers on their best day can get anybody. It's just they always screw it up at the end. We know the Dolphins are one of the better teams in the league. And, the Bills have had success against them. And then the Bills have already lost a game to the Patriots. So I think realistically speaking, the Bills can only afford to lose one more game this season without just a ton of unforeseen luck coming their way. And you would hate to burn that right away in what is probably the hardest game. But if they get over the hump of the Chiefs game and you can win in Arrowhead, that's where psychologically then you have stacked 3 really good performances. You have blown out the Jets, you have punched with the Eagles, should have won the game, and then you've beaten the Chiefs, and now you're set up to go on a run where you host the Cowboys in Buffalo. Cowboys coming out of a similar situation that the Eagles were in, where they will be coming off of a game against the Eagles and then coming to Buffalo. So you do wonder about the emotion of it. If they were to lose that game to the Eagles and all of a sudden they feel like the division is out of reach, you wonder about motivation and things like that. But there's a couple of situations I want to talk about before we get into like who we should root for this week and who we shouldn't. And we're going to play with the New York Times playoff machine, some odds, let you know what the implications this week are. There's 2 teams right now that I think are very important for the Bills if you're focused on the wild card. One is the Miami Dolphins. And boy, is this going to sound weird, but if you are focused solely on the wild card, you want Miami to have everything locked up that they can lock up by week 18, because you want them to have no motivation to play their starters. The good news is when you look at the standings, Miami is sitting there at 8-3, and the Chiefs are 8-3. The Jaguars are also 8-3, and the Ravens are 9-3. If the Dolphins were to lose to the Ravens, that would all but probably knock them out of the number 1 seed, because then they will have lost to the Ravens, lost to the Chiefs. Head-to-heads wouldn't be in their favor, and they wouldn't be live for the bye. I think there's a very realistic chance that Miami goes into week 18 with nothing to play for, knowing they're going to be playing the next week. And they probably don't want to go against a Bills team who we know is going to be playing ultra desperate. Like, what would Miami's motivation be outside of sticking it to the Bills to expend all their energy to beat a Bills team only to turn around and maybe play them again the next week? So that's one. 2, on the other side of it, the Ravens. We need the Ravens to need to win week 18 because they play the Steelers week 18. And what we don't want to have is the Ravens to have everything locked up. And then all of a sudden Lamar Jackson's sitting and all their good defensive players are sitting. And then the Steelers get a free ticket to the playoffs. Those are 2 scenarios. Now, what the playoff picture looks like, for those that don't know, we mentioned the 4 division teams, but it really is a cluster of 6 teams right now, 7 if you want to include the Bengals. I'm choosing not to. It is the Steelers at 7-4, the Browns at 7-4, the Colts at 6-5, the Texans at 6-5, the Broncos at 6-5, and the Bills at 6-6. The bad news is the Bills have already lost head-to-head to the Broncos. That's very unfortunate in this. The good news is a lot of these teams play each other starting this week with the Broncos and the Texans. Luka, I know you've spent a lot of time in the ESPN playoff machine, the New York Times playoff machine, but is there one overarching feeling? And maybe we start with this Texans Broncos game because it can be confusing. They have the same record, they're both in front of us. Do you have a feel right now for which one of those two teams the Bills should be rooting for?
I mean, if projecting out and everything like that, the Texans seem to have a little bit more of a harder slate in front of them. So realistically, if you really want to get down to it, you should more likely root for the Broncos in this case, because maybe the Texans can have losses that stack up. But at the end of the day, I also just believe that the Broncos can still lose any given day. And just the run that they're currently on just feels so artificial. And I just don't know where it's coming from, that once someone finally sweeps the leg from underneath them, like the Texans could, it just all collapses and falls apart in the end. So it's one of those ones where I really, truly don't know ultimately what I should be rooting for. Normally, what I would do is whoever has the toughest schedule in front of them in a head-to-head matchup like this, I am rooting against, because again, there is a more likelihood that they are going to lose games beyond this game. I just still don't believe in the Broncos at this point in time and everything like that. So realistically, if the Broncos have an easier path though in front of them and have the tiebreaker on the Bills, if they kind of work their way out of the way, and then you have the Browns, which you would think will regress now that they're going to Joe Flacco and things of that nature, maybe that's the best way. It truly is kind of a mind, I wanted to say a bad word there.
Mind meld? Mind bender?
Yeah, mind bender, we'll call it. Just truly on who you want there. I would say you want Denver to start losing. But at the same time, it's like their schedule is so easy in front of them that I truly don't know. So I'm going to just go ahead and say Denver, because I believe that they'll just fall off eventually once you get one loss under them. But it truly is kind of a coin flip.
So I'm going to go the other way. I will say that if you use the New York Times playoff odds in real time, as in you don't go in there and fill out any Bills results just yet, you want to take these games as they happen. There is no impact here on Broncos or Texans. It's the same difference on the Bills. Now, if you go in there and you start checking the Bills to win 4 out of their next 5 games, and let's just say you give them a loss to the Cowboys, all of a sudden we actually find ourselves in a situation where that actually evened out again. So there is no difference. Okay. No. So my reason for saying I'm going to root for the Texans to win this game, when I look at what the Broncos have ahead of this, after the Texans game, so both these teams are 6-5. And here's the goal. You need to get 3 of these teams. No, you need to get 4 of these teams to 8 losses. Excuse me, 3 of these teams to 8 losses, because there is room for 2 of them to make it along with the Bills. And we're talking about 6 teams. So we need to get 3 of these teams that aren't the Bills to 8 losses to give the Bills the wiggle room to have 7 and still get in. If the Broncos lose this week, they're 6-6. They have 2 games left with the Chargers, and they go to the Lions. They also have a game against Belichick's Patriots, and they close the season at the Raiders, which doesn't sound difficult until you realize the Raiders have absolutely owned the Broncos in recent history. So I could easily see, if they lose to Houston this week, the Broncos losing a couple more along the way. The other thing I like about this, if you give the Texans this win, they get to 7-5. The Texans week 18 play the Colts. And that I would like for that game to set up to be whoever wins that game is in, whoever loses that game is out. That's very realistic, because while the Colts go to the Titans this week, that could be a win, but you don't want to assume anything with Gardner Minshew. They also go to the Bengals again, could be a win, but I think roster-wise, the Bengals are probably better. They play the Steelers, who are in this mix. They play the Falcons, who are fighting for a playoff spot before ultimately coming home and playing the Texans. I could see the Colts dropping a couple along the way. And then you have this Browns team that they play the Rams this week, and they're starting Joe Flacco at quarterback. That's the other part about this that's so frustrating, is we're talking about Joe Flacco, Gardner Minshew, and Kenny Pickett. The Browns also do play the Texans. So another thing to keep in mind for everybody, there's a couple of teams along the way that we are all big fans of right now. The Chargers, I know it sounds weird, but they play the Broncos twice, and the Bills are going to have to beat the Chargers to get in anyway. So at this point in time, feel free to just let the Chargers keep winning. Although you want them to lose this week to New England because you don't want New England to get a big pick, but whatever. The Jaguars. The Jaguars are a team that pop up on these schedules a lot. They did the Bills a real solid last week by beating the Texans. They play the Browns next week, and they play the Bengals this week. If you want that, the Bengals are still kind of in this mix. So we're going to be rooting for the Jaguars and the Jets. They play the Texans next week. They play the Browns week 17. All right. This week, Luka, I think there's some games that we all need to focus in on. And one is one that's kind of near and dear to your heart. The Cardinals at the Steelers. Now, look, I understand the Cardinals are bad, but I will say in the NFL, when you have a huge advantage at quarterback, that can erase literally everything else. And when I look at this Cardinals Steelers matchup, I see a massive advantage for the Cardinals at quarterback. I think Kyler Murray, still on his best day, is in that top 10 conversation, top 10 ish. And Kenny Pickett, I think on his worst day, you wonder if he's a top 32 quarterback. So, all of that in mind, I understand that they're going to have a lot of trouble blocking TJ Watt, and they're not going to be able to run the ball consistently. James Conner revenge game if you want it. But at the end of the day, Kyler Murray, I think, gives them a chance. What kind of chance do you give the Cardinals in this game?
Look, the quarterback point is valid. Even Kenny Pickett on an average day gives you questioning if he is a top 32 quarterback in the league. Kyler, yeah, let's say, top 12-ish quarterback on a good day. Where I kind of draw the line in the sand is there, and then just look at everything after it. First and foremost, to be quite frank, from watching the Cardinals and just understanding that whole West Coast playing East Coast at 1:00 kickoff time,
True.
that is horrible. Like the product instantly, no matter how good you are, just goes down and just falls off a shelf even at times. On top of that, the Cardinals defense is just a disorganized disaster. It is horrible. And even with a subpar Kenny Pickett, I think Tomlin and the coaching staff and just a little bit of a resurgence there with the offense and stuff, it's tough for me to live in a world, and no spoilers on what potentially could be coming later, but wink, wink. It's tough for me to live in a world where I see the Cardinals winning this game. Yes, for the Bills' sake, it would be massive. This is a game that the Steelers absolutely need to win, and then they have other losses in the schedule right now. You talked about the Colts. They're a team that's coming up. They have to go to Baltimore the final week of the season. We'll see how much that game matters. There are still opportunities for the Steelers to lose in this schedule that if one of these, must win games for them, and it's not a must win in the sense of the season's lost at that point, but it's a must win because it's a supposed to win. It's supposed to be a W on the schedule. If they were to lose that game to a lowly Cardinals, that would send some shock through the locker room, let's just call it, and really make Mike Tomlin question what the heck is going on, because in no way or fashion should a Kyler Murray and no one else led Arizona Cardinals team walk into Pittsburgh for a 1:00 kickoff with probably some pretty crappy weather, might I add you, and just, walk all over you or even just take a win from you in any stretch of the imagination. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic about that one. It's just a result that I really struggle to, it would be huge for the Bills, but I'm really having a tough time seeing, I have a tough time seeing the Cardinals win, let alone covering the spread that they currently have in front of them.
Yeah, I get that. The thing I will say is the challenge we laid out is you want to get these teams to 8 losses. The Steelers are at 7-4, which means they have to lose 4 out of their last 6. The good news is, as Luka mentioned, it gets tough down the stretch. At Seattle, at Baltimore to close the season, if that game matters to the Ravens, the Steelers would be underdogs in both of those games. So even if you want to be generous and give them 6 losses, they also have a trip to Indy. That's a coin flip game. Either way, a team we need to lose is going to lose. And then that's where you need a team like the Cardinals, like the Bailey Zappi Patriots, like the Bengals, who they play afterward, to win. But we are a couple Steelers wins away from just kind of letting them go. And there is a very realistic possibility, Luka, that if the Steelers win this week and next week, Cardinals Patriots, that we are just absolutely rooting for the Steelers to beat the Colts the week after that. And we're like, okay, fine. The Steelers are in. Do us a favor and beat the Colts. Now, look, I know I've said before, I have family that roots for the Colts. I hate having to root against the Colts, but it's the reality we're in right now. And the Colts are another team that we need to lose. And to get to 8 losses, they have a little bit of a tricky schedule. They go to Atlanta, Steelers. They play the Texans week 18. This Titans game this week in Tennessee, I think these teams on paper are probably fairly even. And I say that more as to discredit what I think the Colts are. Jonathan Taylor's out. I know Zach Moss is in. The Titans have some issues on defense, but they always play the Colts tough. I am not a Will Levis fan at all, and that's what scares me about this matchup. If Ryan Tannehill was playing, I'd feel a lot better about it. What kind of a chance do you give the Titans in this matchup against the Colts?
The Titans are a home team. Like they just play decent football at home. They'll never play decent football at this point on the road, but there's just something about them when at home that I do give them a fighting chance. I will say, I think I respect Gardner Minshew more than we'll say the average. And the Titans pass defense, for what it's worth, is not good. They can stop the run, but it's a good week to be without Jonathan Taylor. You're probably not going to want to really lean on that in the first place. And just at the end of the day, I would expect the Colts to win. I think Gardner Minshew is still, even if he is kind of that average to below average guy for you, he should still be able to manage things with a Titans defense in front of him. And then, as you pointed out with Will Levis, I mean, talk about a true wild card of a rookie. You really don't know what you're going to get. He showed you that first game flash of kind of just dicing up. Well, not even dicing up, just throwing bombs to DeAndre Hopkins to kind of put the league on notice in a way. But then after that, he has just been inconsistent, to say the least, and doesn't really truly know what to do. So I don't trust the Titans at all. They are a team though, where I just go, they do play better at home. It's a divisional game. Like you mentioned, the Titans always play the Colts tough. There's always so much familiarity there. You know, Mike Vrabel is a great coach. You do wonder if they truly could maybe pull that one out. That would be big time for the Bills. At the end of the day, I would say it's probably 55-45. I lean to the Colts, but it is definitely more on the coin flip side of things where things could go awry for the Colts. Say they throw an early pick or something just doesn't go their way early, that just kind of catches them off guard. The Titans capitalize. That could be where they find themselves in trouble. And we do see a Titans over Colts kind of situation.
Yeah, I think if we could, the Colts game to me is the biggest one on the slate, and the next biggest one to me is Browns at Rams, because the Browns are going to be a tricky team. They only have 4 losses. They're starting Joe Flacco. They have a tough schedule at Rams, not overly tough. Then Jacksonville. We'll see what kind of form the Jets are in. If they still care, I think the Jets can be a team that challenges you, and they go to Houston. So when you look at this Browns team, Luka, what kind of a shot do you give the Rams this week? I haven't looked to see who's favored. You'd have to think probably the Rams, given it's Matt Stafford against Joe Flacco. But man, rest of the roster wise really leans in favor of the Browns, in my opinion. I think the Browns are live in this game. And I think that would be a huge blow to the Bills' chances of getting in at 10-7 if the Browns can go out there and get to 8-4 with a win in LA.
So the line opened up, just for what it's worth, Rams 5-point favorites. It's moved down to 4. And what I see in that, there was a little bit of a money move on that. I think people were flooding kind of the Rams early, just once quarterback stuff, or sorry, the Browns, once it was kind of like a realization that, hey, Joe Flacco's coming in. They still have a really good defense, stuff of that nature. There was one thing I heard, and I can't remember who it was from. The Browns in Stefanski's offense is something that Joe Flacco is extremely familiar with. It is very similar to what he ran in Baltimore during his heyday. And I think Joe Flacco is at least a cerebral enough quarterback that he's not going to throw away the game on you. He never has really been that guy. He's never been really truly that one to take over as well. But the Browns are the kind of team that don't need you really ever to take over. Myles Garrett looked to have avoided that massive injury that it may have seemed like at the end of last game. and it was kind of the sky was half falling, only to find out he may be playing Sunday. And that defense is still very good, even outside of him, although he is a massive part of it. The Browns are just such a well constructed team that I do see a world where the Rams win this week, especially if Myles Garrett's out. I think the Browns are a very good run defense, but it's not like the Rams run a traditional run offense anyways. They get the ball to their running back in a variety of different ways, and then also then have Matt Stafford to dice you up a little bit more over the top. That, you know, being in LA, things like that. If you're without Myles Garrett, Joe Flacco still trying to kind of off the couch into the starting lineup now, it maybe feel it out. I could see a world where it's a close game and you're like, okay, the Browns are still a good team, which then they go on this stretch of games where it's Jags, but then Bears at Texans, Jets at Bengals. Like I can still see in that last 5-game stretch there, Josh, where the Browns could go 3-2 there, even with Joe Flacco at the helm. And that's one where I just think their defense is too good. I think they're too well of a constructed team that, yes, they may lose this game this week at the Rams just due to a couple little things, but it's still going to be a hard fought game. And there's still a very good team around a third string quarterback, fourth string quarterback, depending on how you want to look at it. And even if they're without Myles Garrett for a week or two, I think they can still get over the line. But it is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. That is for sure. If Joe Flacco is truly just should go back to the couch kind of deal, then I think we're really starting to wonder if the Browns can even put together 2 wins, let alone 3 or 4 to get over the hump.
Yeah, and I think much like the Steelers with the Cardinals, maybe even more so, if the Browns beat the Rams this week and improve to 8-4, and they look good doing it, like you said with Flacco, if he looks like, oh wow, he's got the system down, maybe they become a team that you're just like, okay, we got to let them go too, and then you're down to one spot for 4 teams: Texans, Colts, Broncos, Bills, and that's where it starts to get tricky, and that's why in a perfect world, the Bills would win all 5, get to 11-6, make the playoffs. Everything's great, but we want to give them leeway because we've seen these Bills this year. Even when they win, they have a way of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, which they did last week, and they did against the Broncos, they did against the Patriots, and they did against the Jets. what a fun ride. All right, Luka. So we've talked a little bit about what the Bills need to do. We both agree they need to at least win 4 out of 5, and that Kansas City game is about as must win gets on the schedule. We've said we both agree that the more likely path is probably wild card, although you're still open to the division. Now, look, and you hate to say it this way, but this is the reality of the NFL. And I'm not saying this because Tua has struggled with injury. I'm saying this because we're talking about a Browns team that's down to now their 4th quarterback of the year, a Colts team that's down to Gardner Minshew. The Bengals have lost their starting quarterback. Stuff is still going to happen that we can't even see coming. The Dolphins already lost Jalen Phillips. Devon Achane has been in and out, in and out. If something unforeseen happens, we're certainly not rooting for this, and Tua is out for the rest of the year, that changes this entire conversation, right? Or if something happens, I don't even want to put this in the universe, but like CJ Stroud, that changes the entire look of that team. CJ Stroud is excellent. Russell Wilson. So there is still plenty of room for the NFL to do what the NFL does and tank a team out of nowhere because the injury bug is undefeated in this league. So what the Bills have to do is just keep winning games and add them up at the end. How confident are you that the Bills can go 4-1? I know we've seen some improvement under Joe Brady. They looked dynamite last week offensively against the Eagles. Obviously, the miscommunication between Allen and Davis is what stands out in overtime. They looked very good against the Jets the week before. The schedule is tough, but what's your confidence level right now on this team going 4-1? What kind of odds would you give it, and where are you at with that?
I do believe this team can go 4-1. If I had to give a percent chance on what I think they can do when it comes to that, I'd probably label it at 40%. That doesn't sound optimistic, but I just got to be real about it as well. It's better than what I would have thought I would be at following of Eagles loss. I'll tell you that. The thing it's funny, you made a comment, the offenses look better under Joe Brady. I think it's just the offense looks out of its own way under Joe Brady. I don't think Joe Brady is adding anything to this. It's just and I believe you and or I have said it in previous shows, both the live show and podcast, that it's like all that Joe Brady seems to have done is take the offense that they have clearly designed all offseason leading into this year and just not get in the way. And it seemed like Ken Dorsey, of course, going back to that whole conversation, was always just getting in the way. He had some sort of idea in his brain on what he wanted to do, and it just never worked. Like, and it was almost counteractive, and it's like it made no sense. It was just a design of no design. It was very strange. So Joe Brady now is just sitting there with an offensive mind that he has and is just calling the offense from a different perspective without trying to get in the way of Josh Allen and the playmakers. And it's clearly working better because when you just have the ball in your best player's hands, it works out generally in the positive more than the negative. So it's just one of those things where I do think there's improvement, but it's more of just, I think finally the past couple games, at least, we've seen the team just get out of its own way most of the time when it comes to the players on the field. There's a whole game management conversation, of course, to be had there as well, where they do still get in their way a little bit. But overall, a 4-1 finish, it's definitely going to be dependent on these next couple of games. Obviously, those are by far, in my opinion, your toughest games that you have coming up. But if you split those games, then you're asking me essentially, can they go 3-0 down that final stretch? Yes, I do believe they can. If we come back to this conversation following the Chiefs and Cowboys games, and they went 1-1 in those, I would probably tell you the percentage chance that they go 3-0 at Chargers, home to Patriots, and at Dolphins, depending on the Dolphins situation. I'd probably tell you that it's probably like a 66% shot. Like I do believe that the team should be able to take care of business when games matter. There's no reason for them to overlook games anymore. It would be a mismanagement to what they do in the week to overlook a Chargers game or overlook the Patriots for that matter, because earlier this season they got taken care of by those Patriots. That is why they're in this current situation that they are. So I do believe they can. I would put a percentage chance right now, 40 to 45%, that they go 4-1 down the stretch. That's just based on the whole thing when it comes to the Chiefs and Cowboys. We can readdress that once we get to post Cowboys.
Yeah, I'm with you. Jesse James Smearman says, I would love to see Frank run the offense next season. I understand where you're coming from. Frank Reich is obviously a beloved figure in Bill's history. He's a former head coach in the NFL twice now, so that comes with some cachet. He obviously is a Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator. I would disagree with you, Jesse. I don't have a whole lot of interest in seeing Frank Reich come back for a couple of reasons. One, I would love to err on the side of continuity with Josh Allen. If we're going to go by Tim Graham's report, which I am certainly going to, that Sean McDermott's coming back next year. My hope is that Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator because I like what I've seen from him, and I would like to see the continuity come through. I also think that if you bring in Frank Reich, a guy that has head coaching experience, you're just really turning up the volume anytime Sean McDermott makes a mistake of, well, you have this guy on your staff ready to take over that's been a head coach before. I don't know, Luca, you have any quick thoughts on Frank Reich before we move on to another question I see in chat?
I have no interest in it. Just
Okay.
bottom line. I think you bring up, yeah, he's got head coaching experience now and stuff. He got 2 gigs within 2 years and he's been fired both times for, decent reason. Like there Frank Reich is one of those things, all respect to him. And as you said, he's a Super Bowl winning coordinator. Things worked out very well for that year in Philly. I don't see it outside of that one run with, everything that went on. And I just don't see it with him. I don't think he's necessarily a kind of guy that I could see improving things here in any sort of fashion. Um, it's just not one of those ones beyond the love affair that, fans would have with him and just the nostalgia of it. I just don't believe it really. I don't see the value in it.
Our guy Roy Collins chimes in. Is your belief of 4-1 based on your faith in the offense or defense? On that one, Roy, I would tell you, for me, it's the offense because as encouraged as I have been with the defense, I think the defense has played well in spots, particularly with all the injuries they're dealing with. I think there's been a turning point in recent weeks, and this defense looks like they can be at least a top half of the league defense. But this team is going to go as far as their offense carries it, and the fact that they look finally like the vintage Buffalo Bills under Josh Allen, dating back to what they looked like under Daboll at times and early Ken Dorsey. That's where my belief comes from, because I don't think this team, as currently constructed with the guys they're down on defense, can go out there and win 20-17 slugfest consistently. I think their defense has shown a tendency to get worn down late in games because they're overextending guys like Ed Oliver, who in his career have been playing 50, 60% snap share, was up to 80 plus last week. So I think this defense needs the offense to come through. So that's where my optimism comes from. Luka, where are you at on your optimism level?
Yeah, I mean, this team is going to go now as far as 17 brings them. It is as simple as that. It really truly is. I mean, they are a miscommunication away from winning that game in Philly thanks to number 17. The game got out of hand against the Jets thanks to 17 overcoming the tough defense of the Jets and eventually breaking them down and getting the score out of reach, where we knew that their offense was not going to be able to do anything because of their own issues, not because of our defense. It's one of those situations where, when we are playing at Arrowhead, when we are home against the Cowboys, everything like that, it is going to be up to Josh Allen. Now, and the irony is it always has felt that way. We just have had a lot of other things and a lot of great players around the team overall that could then do a very good job in their own right to really take it over the top. But this team is Josh Allen dependent. This team will always be, it unfortunately feels like at this point in time, Josh Allen dependent. So they are only going as far this season now more than ever as far as Josh Allen takes them. It's one of those ones where I wish we had a better team and not as many injuries and all of these other things, of course. But if there was a quarterback you needed to be on the shoulders of, there's very few that are better than number 17 and Josh Allen.
And then one more question from Jesse here. As long as this Vaughn thing doesn't become a distraction, and I'm going to tiptoe around this a little bit, I will say that neither Luka nor I want to get into like the legality of it because that's just not the space we want to be in. And I have no problem speaking for Luka on this. Like neither one of us have any interest in coming off like we're minimizing what happened. Our hearts go out to the lady involved. I mean, she's a pregnant woman. If true, it's a disgusting story. We all understand that all we can talk about here is the football aspect. So, from a football standpoint, Jesse, I don't necessarily think this will be a distraction because the reality of what Von Miller has been this year is a very minimal impact player. And I think you could make a football argument that taking Von Miller out of the equation and giving more snaps to guys like AJ Epinesa, Leonard Floyd, Gregory Rousseau, and even Kingsley Jonathan is a net positive for this team from a purely football standpoint. So I don't think this, I think it in the situation, you hate to say it like this because you don't want to minimize what happened because it's a gross situation. This is not a player that you take him out of the mix and you think, how are the Bills going to get over that? And because of that, I think that minimizes the impact of the distraction. These guys are all pros. They've been in locker rooms. They've been around situations like that. They've been around situations with holdouts, with money, with players going away. So I think they'll be able to compartmentalize and get past it. Luke, if you have anything you want to add on that.
No, not really. I mean, I think saying minimal impact player, that was a very well way, as Roy Collins said, a really kind way to say it. I do believe that this is a team, and as much as you can say against McDermott with, on the field stuff, game management, all of that kind of stuff, when it comes to actual Sundays, the one thing that his value still is in that locker room is kind of always making sure there's a unified focus. And he's just one of those kind of man management, kind of just driven individuals where, he doesn't let disaster come back into into the building and create a crap storm. Like he is someone that I do believe, even if his message is somewhat getting stale, if that is the actual case, he can still at least make sure that the locker room and everyone is focused on the task at hand, and the task at hand is simply whatever it is that coming week, whether it's the bye week and we need to get ready for Kansas City, of course, or then when it is Kansas City week and so on and so forth. So I don't believe that in-house it will be too much of a distraction, regardless of how it all breaks down, all said and done.
Couple more questions to get through from chat, and then we will get into Luka's locks, which is his best bets of NFL Week 13. But we have some good questions in chat. Couple coming up on Sean McDermott and his future. We'll get to that in a second. Maybe along those lines, Jesse asks, who do we want to put on the defense next season? And I'm taking that as Jesse asking like who's running the defense. And maybe I'm misinterpreting that as like which players, because I don't think from a player standpoint, Jesse, the Bills are going to have the ability to really go out and sign too many big ticket options. I would say that, Micah Hyde is probably gone. I think Jordan Poyer is probably gone. Terrell Bernard is going to be here. Matt Milano should come back. We'll see what happens with Daquan Jones. I think they'll probably do something with Rasul Douglas's deal. Maybe they'll see if they can get Leonard Floyd on a long-term deal where it's a minimal cap hit early. I think maybe it's an either-or situation with him and Epinesa. I would like to see them keep Epinesa also. But as far as running the defense, and that's where I want to take this question, I don't want it to be Sean McDermott. I think we've seen signs that running the defense while running the team has been too much on his plate. We've seen, I think, the worst game management season of Sean McDermott's career. Situations that I thought he was previously very sharp in, he has not been as sharp this season. I think that could be a downstream effect of running the defense while running the team. There are three really good candidates on the Bills right now. They would be my most likely candidates. Defensive assistant Al Holcomb, who I thought was going to be brought in as the replacement for Leslie Frazier before McDermott ultimately took over the role. Al Holcomb was the defensive coordinator in Carolina 2 years ago after who was the head coach there? Matt Rule was fired. Yeah. Steve Wilkes promoted to head coach. And then you had Holcomb promoted to interim defensive coordinator. They have history together. Eric Washington has been a defensive coordinator previously in his career. He's assistant to the head coach. He's the one that actually speaks on Tuesdays for the defense. And then Bobby Babich, the linebackers coach. Those would be three names to me. I would not expect the Bills to go outside their building because it will still be the McDermott defense, but I do think they're going to need somebody else calling plays on Sundays because that's been just a little bit too much of a heavy lift for Sean McDermott, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line of this is it should be someone else. It shouldn't be Sean McDermott. Where they go from there, I'm not exactly sure. The Al Holcomb idea is funny to me because on one hand, he's familiar with the style of defense that McDermott wants to run. I mean, there's Al Holcomb, Sean McDermott. You got what's his name? Oh man, why am I blanking on his name? Steve Babich. Steve Wilkes is also who was popping in my head. All these guys have a very similar philosophy because they come from a similar place when it comes to defense and what they want to try to achieve. My issue with Al Holcomb, I'll be quite honest, is I can't get the 2018 Cardinals out of my head. That was really the first big try at being a defensive coordinator he had under Steve Wilkes, and it was a complete disaster, to be quite frank. It was 1 year. It's a small sample size. It's not really truly fair. It's just that's a lasting image, unfortunately, that I have of it. He did a much better job with the Panthers once he got kind of that promotion by firing. Once Steve Wilkes was then promoted as interim, once Matt Rule was fired, and then Al Holcomb became the DC. He did a much better job with that Panthers defense at that point in time. So it would be interesting to see what he would be able to do. He has that at least he has DC experience, right? He has lived the lows, he's had some success, and then now you're handing the keys over to him so that if you are Sean McDermott, you can get back to focusing on those bigger picture head coaching things that you need to both on game days and throughout the week. And that is the most important part of this. And that is what needs to be said. It shouldn't be McDermott. If and when the time comes that they are still with McDermott at the head coaching position, this should be a one and done situation for him. He needs to figure out something else when it comes to that DC position.
DJ McGee with the last question before we get to Luka's locks. And I'm going to lead off with actually Oliver's point here. McDermott still calling games like he has quarterback Tyrod Taylor. I agree with that, Oliver. And boy, is it strange because up until this year, the Bills were one of the more aggressive teams in the sport. And we've seen that kind of regress this year. I know Josh Allen has been a little bit more mistake prone. But yeah, the end of game sequence last week against the Eagles, particularly birding timeouts to ice the kicker instead of saving them for an end of game aggressive strike, rubbed both of us the wrong way. We certainly expressed that on the post game show. We both took turns yelling about that. But DJ McGee asks, "Evening, gents. Is the Buffalo fan base as dissatisfied with McDermott as you guys are?" I will say, DJ McGee, it's a tricky question to answer because the context of getting a temperature read on the fan base is difficult because it is a large fan base. And generally, the outspoken voices are the ones that are currently upset. People that call into sports radio shows, people that tweet accounts like ours and voice their frustration are generally the ones that are upset at that current time. So if we were to put out a question of how are you feeling about Sean McDermott, the majority of replies would be I hate him, because those are the people that are ready to, they need to vent. And I understand that. Like that's human nature. But I would hate to look at that small sample size of like 10 callers onto WGR or 100 replies to a tweet we put out and think that that accurately represents the fan base. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably split 50-50. I think you have a segment of the fans who probably stand a little closer to where I think Luka and I are at, where we're like, hey, Sean McDermott's not a scrub. He's a good coach. He's proven that. But the concern now is, has he maxed out? Has he taken this team as far as he can? You have a Lamborghini quarterback. Is this the right coach? Where ultimately we do think this team, if it's not this year, will be back in high leverage playoff games like they've been in the past. And we've seen this team fold in high leverage situations under McDermott in the playoffs multiple times, whether it's Houston 2019, Kansas City 2021, or not even showing up against the Bengals last year in the playoffs. And then there's the other side of the coin, the fans that are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I lived through the playoff drought. I saw Chan Gailey, Dick Duran, Rex Ryan, Mike Mularkey, Greg Williams. I was waiting my entire life for a guy like Sean McDermott. He's come here and made the playoffs every year but one. The one year was Josh Allen's rookie year. Nobody expected him to make the playoffs that year anyway. Yeah, he's having a down year, but they're probably still going to finish above 500. We finished above 500, what, 3 times in the entire 17-year drought? What are we doing here? So from that standpoint, I have a hard time getting a real temperature on the fan base, but I'll kick it to Luka to see what he thinks. But I think right now is at least the loudest the conversation has been on McDermott. And I think that means that there's at least enough of the segment of the fan base that's getting itchy with him, which can be expected because people tend to be reactive and live in the what have you done for me lately? And it's not been a good year. But I think this is as far down the road as I've heard the conversation consistently go of should we look for a new head coach? What do you think, Luka?
Yeah, I do worry about if we've hit that max, if we've hit the cap of McDermott. It's one of those things where it definitely starts to feel more and more like McDermott is a quality coach, especially in certain environments. If he were to be let go, he would easily find another job for a dysfunctional organization. Let's say the Cardinals, although they did just hire a coach and I don't see them doing that, but they are a dysfunctional organization. I'll tell you that. He would come in and he would clean up the dysfunction, create kind of a synergy in a process, as we all know, of course, trusting the process. He'd create something of a healthy environment for that organization to then move forward and become successful in its own right. And then from there, probably just get it to its kind of max point as well. That is just what he is. I do wonder if he's just kind of that guy where then you do need to find someone with a bigger vision on them. You know, your Doug Petersons, your Andy Reeds, you know, all of those kind of individuals, Sean McVay's, it seems like they coach with a vision. I don't necessarily see that with Sean McDermott. I see a process, I see a system, an individual that is very good at doing what they do, but there is kind of a ceiling to it and not an overall vision on what can still develop and come down the road. I I I will say that and still believe that at this point in time, my issue with letting him go and firing and moving on from Sean McDermott truly is the opportunity to get someone better actually there. And you don't make that move just because of some minimal poor effort. And I do believe the fan base is split on this due to the fact that this is also a fan base that loves to romanticize the past. And McDermott will always be the guy, obviously, keynote ending a drought, a very long playoff drought, of course. And it's one of those things where you hold them to such high stature because of that, justifiably so. And because of that, you truly shouldn't move on from someone like him unless a guaranteed or what seems to be guaranteed better option is there ready to go with a bigger vision for where this team and organization can ultimately go. And that is the only place up from here now is winning championships. That is the bottom line. So is McDermott still capable potentially of doing that? Yes, because he has Josh Allen and other things. He just needs a little bit of luck on his side on top of everything else. But overall, you do start to wonder and question if he's hit that ceiling, and you do need to try to actively find that thing that is better to get yourself over the hump.
There are some examples from NFL past that people like to point to with McDermott. Like they compare him to Marty Schottenheimer, which is laughable. He has a much better playoff record than Marty Schottenheimer. It's not even close. But I've heard maybe he's the Tony Dungy from the Tampa Bay Bucks of the early 2000s, where he's got them out of that years of losing, the yucks as people would call them, and he got them to like consistent playoff team. I know he took them to the NFC Championship game and they lost to the Rams. And then they finally brought in John Gruden. He got him over the hump. And then the other one is it's kind of like, okay, well, Andy Reid kept getting the Eagles close, but he never got him over the hump. Doug Peterson comes in and gets him over the hump. I will just say, like, you have to tell the whole story. Tony Dungy left Tampa and won a Super Bowl in Indianapolis. Andy Reid left Philadelphia, and it wasn't Doug Peterson, it was Chip Kelly. And then it was Doug Peterson. So by the time Doug Peterson showed up, it was no longer McNabb or Michael Vick. It was Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. So it's not just, I just want people to be careful with when they tell these stories. And that doesn't even bring up the fact that Andy Reid went on to win 2 Super Bowls in Kansas City. So everybody just needs to be careful with what you're wishing for. I hear everybody's frustrations on McDermott. I certainly have voiced mine. I would love to see the perfect head coach candidate out there for the Bills. I have a hard time isolating who that is. I like the idea of Ben Johnson, but also get nervous about entrusting what I think the Bills are with a first-year head coach. I also think, quite honestly, and we have a lot of the offseason to talk about this, 2024 could be a tough year from a roster standpoint, I think in a lot of ways. The Bills are probably going to have to take their medicine for pushing the chips in the last few years. It could be a tough year as far as like roster talent. I think they'll still be a playoff level team and they'll have their shot, but I don't know that that's where you want your new coach coming in and a starting off point. So all of that being said, it makes sense to me that they would let McDermott and Bean get one more year. You made this mess. You get to live with the 2024 tough season. But yeah, good conversation. Great questions tonight. We appreciate all of you. And because we appreciate you, now we're going to make you all rich. And this is Luka's guarantee. He doesn't actually guarantee it, so don't text him or message him on Twitter.
Please don't hold me to this.
But we are doing the Week 13 edition of Luka's Locks. And Luka, it was bad early in this year. You were up to 16-20 on the year.
Yeah.
And we have 3 games to get into this week. And I, of course, in my awful, okay, there we go. I was like, I brought the games down. Here we go. All right, Luka. No Bills this week. The Bills have not been included in Luka's Locks, I don't think at all. Because
there was one. I got myself on the trap. I was trying to like reach. It's why you don't chase in gambling, people. Okay. I was trying to chase it a little bit, and at my 2-unit play, I did the alt line to even get plus money on the Bills minus 9.5, I think, in New England. And boy, did that blow up in my face.
All right. Well, it is now time for the Week 13 edition of Luka's Lock, 16-20 on the year. Luka, the first game we're going to talk about is in New England against the Bills' division rivals, New England Patriots. The Los Angeles Chargers are in town. This is a West Coast team traveling east. The Chargers are favored by 5.5 points. The Patriots have made a quarterback change. It will be 4th-round pick from last year, Bailey Zappi, starting for the New England Patriots. Mac Jones is on the bench. The over-under in this game is 40.5 points. What do you like in this game?
This is an ugly game. This is an ugly, ugly game. You have just Brandon Staley and his shit sty of a team with Keenan Allen, who did practice limited today, but he did not practice Wednesday and Thursday. There is a true question mark on him and his availability for kickoff. Personally, for fantasy purposes, I hope he does play. But beyond that, you are kind of thin on the weapons department when it comes to the Chargers. And as it is, they haven't really been looking great, of course. And then on the flip side, the Patriots everyone is aware, so bad right now. You question truly if they can hit double-digit points in a game, let alone actually be competitive in any stretch of the imagination. With all of these things in mind, Josh, there is even one thing on top of it that make my lock and this first lock a thing. at the point of kickoff, you are at 70% precipitation. It's going to be most likely rainy and a sloppy affair. So how in the world is this line sitting at 40.5 right now? I do not know. I do believe Bill Belichick is still a respected defensive individual. I think he can at least limit things when they are a weapon depleted side across from him. And then his offense will just ultimately crap on its own self. Even if there is a defensive score for the Chargers, which is a bad defense, the Patriots offense is a disaster that I truly question if they can even eclipse 7 points. So yeah, 40.5 points. Give that to me all day long on the under.
It's hard to imagine a bigger coaching mismatch than Bill Belichick against Brandon Staley. I know it's happened. I know Bill Belichick has gone against Dick Duran and Mike Balarkey even for the Bills, but holy cow, Brandon Staley, you got to go, buddy. You have been handed this great team and you have screwed it up. All right, Luca's first pick is under. I like that pick a lot. I would side with you on that. The next game we're going to talk about another Bills division rival. The New York Jets are at home this week. They are a 1.5 point underdog at home to the Atlanta Falcons, who are hanging out in the playoff in the hunt graphic. I think they might actually have a playoff spot right now in the NFC. For the Jets, it's going to be round 2 of Tim Boyle. Round 1 did not go well. If you're rooting for the Jets to win, you might at this point be hoping that they bring Zach Wilson back in the game, which does not seem imminent. Maybe they'll go to Trevor Siemian, who's on their practice squad. But Luca, I'm assuming if there's bad weather in New England, there's a good chance of bad weather in New Jersey. How do you see this matchup going?
Yeah, I do believe actually I didn't even think about that in this game because my mind was so set on other stuff, to be quite frank. I do believe there is it's supposed to be bad weather pretty much across the east, coast. I'm just fun fact. But this game right here, Tim Boyle is god awful. The Jets are awful. Saleh was out there saying that his home run running back is looking for home runs all the time and needs to figure out how to get those hard yards more. And that's where I really start to raise some red flags on what's going on, who truly is getting the message across, what words are being said throughout the week. It's much more of a disaster, I believe, than we would have thought at this point, especially if even with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. I think there's a lot of questions on who is ultimately pulling the strings because I feel like if Aaron Rodgers wasn't in the building, Nathaniel Hackett would already be on the street, of course. And that being said, the Falcons are not only in the playoff hunt right now, Josh, they're trying to defend a divisional lead. They are currently leading the NFC South. I guess you were not aware of this.
I wasn't.
And
That doesn't
yeah,
sound
they
right.
had a tough stretch. I believe it was kind of when I was having a bad betting stretch there in mid to late October. They've kind of self-corrected. Magically, they figured out this Bijan Robinson guy. He's pretty good. We're going to try to get him the ball a little bit more regularly. They still love to bring in Algier in as the closer. Hey, I'm not going to question it, whatever. I'm not the guy making these decisions. I've never been in that position. It is questionable, though. Regardless, the Falcons on offense can be productive. Arthur Smith knows how to keep the ball on the ground and at least be efficient in a ground game where turnovers are not going to come up very often. And that is really what the Jets need to be in games. And on the flip side, this Falcons defense is one that I do believe is opportunistic against bad offenses. If you are a bottom 8 offense in this league, they will find success against you. They have Jesse Bates the third, of course, at safety, who had a pick 6 last week and kind of was the one who set the tone in that Saints game that now put them in this division lead position. So that really is why if you're only giving, you only need the Falcons to cover 1.5 against the Jets. Yes, it's in the Meadowlands. I like that a lot. I just don't believe, similar to the Patriots kind of philosophy, I don't believe the Jets can ultimately hit that 10-point mark. You really need defensive turnovers for them to get those points. And the Falcons are not the type of team to give you those opportunities. I don't see a world. Arthur Smith, I would hope, is telling Desmond Ridder, you are throwing no more than 12 passes in this game. You are going to hand this ball off more than you ever have in your life. And we are going to use the 3-headed monster that is Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Cordero Patterson. They are going to all be getting plenty of work in this game. And that is how we're going to live and die by this. And I can easily see a world where the Falcons win this game, let's say 13-6. And that is well then good enough to cover 1.5 points. So give me the Falcons minus 1.5 at the Jets.
I get where you're coming from. I hope you're wrong, though, and I'll tell you why. I hope the Jets come out and win because we need the Jets down the stretch to be playing well. And if they get blown out by the Falcons, I think that'll be a sign that they've quit. And I love chaos. And boy, oh boy, the idea of the Jets hanging on to a false hope of playoffs and bringing Aaron Rodgers back 3 months removed from blowing out his Achilles is just the ultimate chaos. But Luka's not buying the hype of the Jets. Hype of the Jets. He is picking the Falcons to cover 1.5 points. And with the third game, a game we've already talked about a little bit today in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 5.5. Looks like there's some lines that showed at 6.5. We'll go with whatever you end up saying here. At home against the Arizona Cardinals. Kenny Pickett's been struggling, but overall, TJ Watt has been unblockable. That probably will continue this week against the Cardinals. West Coast team traveling east, 1:00, everything you've already talked about. How do you see this game going down? This is a big game for the Bills from a playoff standpoint.
Yeah, for the individuals that do tune in, Josh, when we clip this and send it out as its own right, I will kind of recap everything. TJ Watt, first and foremost. He's going up against Paris Johnson, I believe, is going to be playing there at right tackle. I'm not even sure. I don't even care. TJ Watt's going to have a field day. TJ Watt is far capable of chasing down a Kyler Murray. I do think we've seen Kyler Murray kind of that initial game. He looked very good. He had that burst. Everything was great. He had the game-winning drive at the end. And ultimately, it was like, wow, is Kyler truly back? I think we've seen a little bit of a regression. He's getting tired late in games again. I don't think he's in game shape. So as the game winds on, he's just not quite having that burst like he would in a regular season, not coming off of the injury that he was. They're James Conner dependent. I think the Steelers are more than capable to stop a running back like James Conner, even as efficient as he is. The Cardinals don't have anyone to really take you over the top, even though they do have your Marquise Brown and Rondale Moores. It's just far too inconsistent when it comes to offensive play calling for opportunities to be there. They're just not ready for that, especially then when you add the TJ Watt factor back into this. I don't think Kyler would ever really have time to do so. And then I said earlier in the show, the Cardinals defense is just a joke. I mean, you're Dennis Gardeck, dude. He's a dog out there as your edge defender, but when he's your best edge defender, it's, you're in for some tough times. I mean, Marco Wilson is your number one corner. Oof. Like, there are just so many things going wrong for them. You have Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson as kind of a nice 1-2 punch at safety. Maybe they won't get the top blown off over the top, but you're playing the Steelers. It's not like they're trying to take the top off of you. They're going to grind and just go through their two running backs, play, over the middle with Freiermuth coming back in his second game since, injury. This is one where, yes, the line is actually currently set at 5.5. I believe if I look over here real quick, it did open at 6.5. When I saw this move line down to 5.5, I said, screw it. I'm going to buy up to the 6.5. I'm going to take it more at the even money. And if the Cardinals keep it within a touchdown, I am stunned, because the ultimate X factor, as you hinted, as we talked about earlier, it's a West Coast team going to the East Coast, and not only going and playing on the East Coast, but doing it at the 1:00 kickoff. It is an ultimate thorn in your side. The Cardinals at one point in time, and this is going back years, even like pre the Carson Palmer, great years, even then they had a stretch where I think they were like 3-27 on East Coast games overall. And at 1:00, I think they only had one win entirely. Even the heyday of the Kurt Warner, Anquan Boldin, Larry Fitzgerald days, when they had the 1:00 kickoffs, it was a blowout in New England. It was Anquan Boldin getting his jaw broken in a blowout loss at the Jets. Like, those things just happen. It's unfortunate for West Coast teams when they play at 1:00. It's another reason, but fun fact, that I like the under in Chargers Patriots. But yeah, give me the Steelers -6.5 to cover a touchdown against a lowly Cardinals on Sunday as they try to continue this magical playoff push that I still can't believe is actually a thing.
6.5 makes me think they're trying to beg you to tease it down to half, and then basically you get the Steelers, to win a pick 'em, and then you have to find another game to match with it. Maybe it's the Dolphins and Commanders. But the 3 picks for Luka's locks are the under in the Chargers Patriots game, expecting some bad weather there. The Falcons on the road at the Jets, needing to cover 1.5 points against Tim Boyle and the New York Jets. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, not even needing to win by a full touchdown. Luka says, if you get 5.5, go ahead and pay up, make it 6.5. Doesn't matter. They'll cover it. The Steelers at his 2-unit play. And that will do it for the Week 13 edition of Luka's Locks. All right, Luca. Well, before we get out of here, just kind of looking around the schedule this week. Any final thoughts? Anything that you want to mention? We've talked a lot about the Bills playoff scenarios. We talked a little bit about like Coach McDermott stuff, some big picture stuff. Anything that you want to get into before we get out of here?
This is the last time now until this season's over that Bills fans have the opportunity to just enjoy the game of football. In our previous podcast episode, Josh, you even talked about how difficult it is to watch the NFL at this point. Officiating's at an all-time low. It seems like they almost need to make sure they are heavily involved in order that you know their name. You look forward to hating them every week, so on and so forth. This is finally the week where Bills fans can sit back and just kind of try to remember what they loved about football, what they love about the NFL. And I truly hope that everyone else can enjoy it, because after this week, we get right back to the grind that is our Bills fandom, that it seems like this season especially, and we try to somehow believe that they will make a push. It is possible, but we really are going to see early on if it really will happen as they play that game in Arrowhead.
It's a good point. I mean, this is the last stress-free week because after this, especially if the Bills keep winning, it could get stress-free pretty quick if the Bills lose a couple.
Yeah, well, true.
And the stress is absolutely gone. But yeah, I'm with you. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. One last thing. Zach Ertz cleared waivers as a free agent, and Adam Schefter brought up the Bills as one of the teams that would be interested in his services. I have next to zero interest in that. I'm not sure what kind of an upgrade he would provide over Dawson Knox as the tight end too at this point. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about this. We don't want to see the Bills lean more into this 12 personnel stuff. We like it less. Any appeal of Zach Ertz? For me, I guess the one thing would be if this Dawson Knox injury is worse than we've been led to believe, and Ertz would come here for basically league minimum just to get a shot to play in some sub packages, fine. Otherwise, I'm just fine with Quentin Morris sticking in his role. What are your thoughts on Zach Ertz?
Zach Ertz quite literally doesn't move the needle in any variety ways. His tail end in Arizona, even prior to the injury, like early on in this season when we saw Josh Dobbs just spamming Zach Ertz, it really seemed like it was a bit of a struggle, and they were almost just spamming him to get the stats up to maybe promote some trade value in Zach Ertz, and then he got hurt. I think at the end of the day, the report that the Bills are one of the teams among the interested may have been where his agent was the one to get that report out, and the Bills' name was still lingering on his desk from a few years ago. He's like, oh yeah, there was that one time that the Bills were interested, and they're still a noteworthy team that opened up the eyes of some. I'm going to throw them in this report. Maybe they are still interested. I don't know. It doesn't hurt to add them. It's one of those things where ultimately I think Zach Ertz becomes an Eagle. It just seems like that's going to happen. He is not going to be any sort of impact for them in my mind. I just believe he's going to be trying to ride the coattails of his original team a little bit more to see if he can get that second ring and kind of bump the resume a little bit. And that's okay with me if that's what he wants to do. I have 0.00 interest of him being a Bill. I don't think he does anything for us. I don't think he will do much of anything for anyone anyways. It's just one of those things where when the Bills were listed, it almost gave me a good laugh. So that's really all I think about that.
I'm with you. To me, it absolutely reeked of Agent 101. Who can we include in this? Who might need a tight end? Let's see the tight ends that are injured right now. Oh, Mark Andrews is out. Let's put them in there. Oh, let's not even pay attention to the fact that Isaiah Likely is there. Oh, Travis Kelce's a popular tight end. Let's put them in there. He's not hurt right now, but whatever. Oh, Dawson Knox is out. That's all it read to me. Like, I don't think the Bills would be in on this at all. All right, Luca. Well, this was a fun show. We will be getting this up on YouTube, and it'll be on Bill's Chat. It's obviously going to be on Built in Buffalo. That's where you're watching it right now. If you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us out so much as we are trying to turn this channel into your one-stop shop for all Buffalo Bills and Buffalo sports content. For Luca, I am Josh McCarty. We will see you next week on Bill's Chat Live.